Nature has long been celebrated as the ultimate architect of survival, billions of years of trial and error producing creatures of breathtaking ingenuity. Claws that grip, camouflage that deceives, instincts so finely tuned they seem almost prophetic. Evolution, we are told, always finds a way. Except when it doesn't. Hidden within nature's grand masterpiece are some spectacular blunders, creatures so perfectly engineered for their own undoing that you almost have to admire the irony. These aren't animals killed by predators or drought or human interference. These are animals that, in a very real sense, kill themselves. Their weapons are the very things that should keep them alive: their bodies, their appetites, their deepest instincts. Evolution handed them a toolkit, and somehow they built a trap. From anatomy that grows grotesquely beyond all usefulness to hardwired behaviors that march entire populations straight toward oblivion, these creatures expose a rarely acknowledged truth that natural selection is not a perfect process. It is a tinkerer, not a genius, and sometimes its experiments go magnificently, tragically wrong. These are 10 animals that are, in every sense, their own worst enemies. The squirrel seems, at first glance, like one of nature's tidier success stories: quick, nimble, perpetually busy. But locked inside that energetic little body is a slow-motion catastrophe waiting to happen, and it lives right in the front of the face. A squirrel's incisors never stop growing. This is by design. Constant gnawing on bark, nuts, and hard woody material wears the teeth down at a ferocious rate, so evolution compensated by making them perpetually self-renewing. Ingenious, really. A perfect solution to a very specific problem. Unless the gnawing stops. If a squirrel loses a tooth, suffers a jaw injury, or simply cannot chew properly, the opposing incisor loses its grinding partner and begins to grow unchecked. Without resistance, the tooth doesn't stop. It curves. Slowly, relentlessly, it bends inward like a terrible crescent, pushing toward the soft tissue of the mouth. Left long enough, it pierces the palate. In the most extreme cases, it continues its quiet arc directly into the skull. The very adaptation that makes the squirrel such a competent survivor becomes, under the wrong circumstances, the instrument of its destruction. The tool becomes the weapon. There is something almost noble about the wildebeest's loyalty. These animals survive the sweeping, predator-riddled plains of the Serengeti by sticking together, one of the largest terrestrial migrations on Earth, millions moving as a single heaving organism. Unity is their superpower. The herd is their shield. It is also their executioner. The wildebeest's herd mentality is so deeply wired, so absolute, that it bypasses something most animals retain even in blind panic: individual judgment. When one animal bolts, the rest follow. Not after assessing the threat. Not after a moment's hesitation. They simply follow, because that is what wildebeest do. The herd moves and you move with it, and questioning that impulse is not in the biological vocabulary. Which works perfectly, right up until the animal at the front runs toward a cliff. What follows is not chaos, it is something almost more disturbing than chaos. It is order. A thundering, coordinated cascade of animals pouring over an edge in faithful succession, tons of muscle and bone dropping because the animal ahead dropped, and the one before that, all the way back to a single moment of panic that one animal felt and an entire herd decided to trust. Every autumn, the forests fill with the sound of antlers clashing, an ancient ritual of dominance played out between stags competing for the right to mate. It is one of nature's more dramatic spectacles, raw and percussive, two animals throwing the full weight of their ambition at each other. The antlers evolved precisely for this: broad, branching, built to absorb impact and demonstrate genetic superiority. Nobody told them about the design flaw. In the heat of battle, two stags can lock antlers so completely, so catastrophically, that neither can pull free. The branches interweave, twist, and jam into configurations that no amount of thrashing can undo. What began as a contest for survival becomes a shared sentence. And then the real horror settles in, not the violence, but the stillness that follows. Two animals, enemies moments ago, now bound together in a grotesque partnership neither wanted. They cannot graze. They cannot drink. Every lunge toward food by one animal drags the other in the opposite direction. Predators, sensing the opportunity, begin to circle. The stags fight exhaustion, starvation, and thirst simultaneously, each animal's fate now entirely dependent on the survival of the rival it was trying to defeat. They die together. The victor and the vanquished, inseparable. If the squirrel's tragedy is one of teeth, the sheep's is one of architecture. Specifically, the architecture of its most iconic feature, those grand, spiraling horns that have made certain breeds the very image of rugged, mountain-dwelling toughness. In the wild, large curved horns signal strength and genetic fitness. They are a biological advertisement, and for millennia, they worked. Then selective breeding arrived, and humans, enchanted by the drama of an impressively curled horn, began pushing the trait further than nature ever intended. In some breeds, the horn doesn't simply curve attractively away from the skull. It curves back toward it. The growth is slow and patient and utterly indifferent to the damage it is accumulating, a tightening spiral on a collision course with the animal's own face. Millimeter by millimeter, the horn presses inward, riding against cheekbone and jaw, until it begins crushing the underlying bone or piercing the soft tissue of the face entirely. Without human intervention, without regular trimming that nature never had to provide, the animal enters a prolonged, worsening decline. It is perhaps the most quietly ironic entry on this list, a creature undone not by wildness, but by the very hands that were supposed to care for it. The Babirusa looks, at first glance, like something a child invented, a pig with tusks erupting not from the sides of its mouth but directly through the skin of its snout, curving upward into the air like a pair of misplaced antennae. It is bizarre enough in appearance that early European naturalists assumed the specimens they encountered were elaborate hoaxes. They were not hoaxes. They were, however, a very elaborate mistake. The male Babirusa's upper tusks grow upward through the flesh of the snout itself, punching through skin and continuing their arc toward the sky. In younger animals this looks merely extraordinary. In older animals, it begins to look like a threat assessment. Because the tusks do not stop. They curve skyward, then back, completing a slow orbit that gradually, inevitably, points their tips toward the animal's own forehead. Unlike the lower tusks, which see regular use in combat and feeding, the upper tusks make contact with nothing. There is no natural grinding, no resistance, nothing to interrupt the growth. Left unchecked, they complete their arc and press into the skull, the Babirusa essentially being impaled, with magnificent patience, by its own face. It is perhaps the most aristocratically absurd death in the animal kingdom. The turtle's shell is one of evolution's most celebrated achievements, a portable fortress, fused to the spine, capable of outlasting almost any threat the world cares to throw at it. Predators bounce off it. Time barely dents it. Some species carrying this armor have been alive since the dinosaurs, which is either inspiring or deeply unsettling depending on your relationship with geological time. There is, however, one adversary the shell cannot defeat: gravity. Flip a turtle onto its back and you have created a problem that all that ancient engineering is spectacularly ill-equipped to solve. The very feature that makes the animal impervious to attack, the smooth, domed, beautifully curved carapace, becomes a perfect rocking surface with no grip, no leverage point, and no mechanism for recovery. The legs paddle at the air with increasing desperation, finding nothing useful to push against. In a cool, shaded environment, a flipped turtle might struggle for hours before exhaustion wins. In direct sunlight, the calculus is grimmer and faster. The shell, so effective at protecting against teeth and claws, now efficiently absorbs and traps heat, turning the animal's greatest asset into something uncomfortably close to an oven. The fortress, it turns out, has exactly one catastrophic vulnerability. There is something almost moving about the honeybee's commitment to its colony. Everything about the bee, its behavior, its biology, its entire existence is oriented around the survival of the hive rather than the individual. The bee is, in the most literal sense, a creature that lives for something larger than itself. Which makes it all the more tragic that its one act of heroic defense is also its last. The honeybee's stinger is barbed, serrated along its length in a way that makes it extraordinarily effective at penetrating and anchoring into flesh. Against other insects, this works without consequence, the stinger withdraws cleanly. But mammal skin is a different proposition entirely. It grips. And when the bee, instinct satisfied, attempts to fly away from the threat it just neutralized, the barb holds fast. What follows is not a clean separation. The stinger, the venom sac, and a significant portion of the bee's abdominal organs are pulled from the body as it tears itself free. The venom sac continues pumping after separation, an impressive piece of autonomous engineering, while the bee itself, now catastrophically incomplete, flies a short distance and dies. It defended the hive. It just couldn't survive the victory. The sloth has, against all reasonable expectation, made lethargy work. Moving so slowly that algae grows on its fur, hanging motionless in the canopy for up to 20 hours a day, barely generating enough metabolic activity to register as a threat to anything, the sloth has turned near total inactivity into a legitimate survival strategy. Predators that hunt by movement simply overlook it. The canopy keeps it safe. Stillness is its genius. And then, once a week, it climbs down to the forest floor to defecate. This is not a minor quirk. This is, statistically, one of the most dangerous decisions a sloth makes in its entire life, which, given that it makes almost no decisions, is saying something. On the ground, the sloth is stripped of every advantage it possesses. It cannot flee. It cannot hide in plain sight. It moves across the exposed forest floor at its customary glacial pace, entirely visible, entirely vulnerable, and entirely committed to completing the task at hand regardless of what is watching. Roughly half of all adult sloth deaths occur during this ritual. Not during a daring escape. Not during a territorial dispute. During a bathroom trip. Evolution, it seems, forgot to account for dignity. If the deer's tragedy is one of geometry, the elk's is one of pure, exhausting excess. Every spring, male elk embark on one of the most metabolically punishing projects in the animal kingdom, growing a full rack of antlers from scratch, sometimes reaching over 18 kilograms of bone, completed in a matter of months. It is the biological equivalent of building a small house on your head before summer ends. The motivation, as ever, is reproduction. Larger antlers attract more females, intimidate more rivals, and signal the kind of genetic robustness a mate wants passed on to her offspring. The logic is sound. The execution, in some individuals, tips past sound into catastrophic. Growing that volume of bone demands staggering quantities of calcium and phosphorus, so much that the body occasionally begins pulling minerals from the skeleton itself to meet the deadline. The antlers are built, impressive and complete, while the animal beneath them is quietly hollowed out. Add to this the caloric cost of carrying the extra weight through autumn rut, when the elk is already burning reserves competing aggressively for mates, and some males arrive at winter's edge not triumphant, but spent. The grandest ornament in the forest. The animal beneath it, barely standing. Evolution gave the bighorn sheep an extraordinary skull. The bones are thick, double-layered, and supported by a network of internal structures engineered specifically to absorb the kind of impact that would kill most animals outright. It is remarkable biological architecture, purpose-built for a single recurring event, two large males running at each other at speed and colliding, forehead to forehead, with a crack that echoes across mountain valleys and can be heard from kilometers away. This happens repeatedly. For years. In any given season, a dominant male might absorb dozens of these collisions, each one landing with a force that researchers have compared to a car accident. The skull holds. That is the point. The whole elegant system was designed so the skull would hold, so the battle could continue, so the fittest ram could prove himself through sheer, sustained capacity for punishment. What the design did not fully account for was accumulation. A skull that survives one collision, then 10, then 100, is still absorbing force each time. The brain inside shifts. Slowly, across years of competition, the damage compounds. Immune function declines. Neurological wear quietly accumulates. The bighorn sheep's tragedy is not that its armor failed. It's that it worked just well enough to allow a lifetime of damage.